All right, y'all, we are back. I am Brandon Snyder with Selling the Snyder Group, and I'm here joined with Tony.
Hello, hello.
And today we are talking about something that we've already talked about before. A few months ago, we posted a video about the NAR lawsuit and what that meant for home buyers and home sellers. And we had some questions, some leftover questions afterwards. And luckily, we have an update for you. This is important. If you haven't seen the previous video, highly recommend you watch it because it's not really being talked about in the news anymore. I'm sure you've seen there's other things going on in the world.
Yeah.
So originally, I think there was a couple big changes since the last video. But if you haven't watched that video, I'll give you the quick highlights. The National Association of Realtors entered a settlement to change how they do business. So as real estate professionals, commissions has always been negotiable, but there was always a quote-unquote set standard and expectation, if you will. That no longer is the case. What ended up happening was the lawsuit happened, and the National Association of Realtors and all MLSs across the country that were part of this lawsuit had to opt into these changes. So big change number one, and this is just a recap. Definitely recommend you watch the other video. But number one, if you have a house that you want to see, and you are working with a real estate agent to see that house, then you have to have a representation agreement before you go into that house.
Yep.
That is big change number one. We're going to dive into this a little bit later, but just wanted to give you a recap on that. Number two is that offers of compensation are no longer allowed to be listed on the MLS. Now, this is important because what this was doing was preventing agents from showing clients their homes, or the homes that were on the MLS, because of compensation was lower than what they expected, or for whatever reason. A huge no-no. Most agents who operate in integrity don't do that, but it was happening, and so that was a big change.
Yeah.
So this lawsuit happened, the settlement happened, and then these changes were announced. There were a couple of questions left over, and I think what ended up happening, and by the way, if you were paying attention to the last video or saw this on the news, it's actually supposed to take effect this month in July, but it got pushed back to August. August 17th is when these changes legally have to take effect. So, Tony, I don't know about you, but for me, in Texas at least, I don't know about other states, but we've always gotten buyer representation agreements with our clients, especially, before going under contract. So, I guess that's not the case in other states. Like, that's kind of weird.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
You can just have it whenever.
Yeah, and now that's a requirement. That's a big deal. Go ahead.
So that means before, let's say I was the buyer and I didn't want to sign it right away, I could still go see homes with you?
Yeah,
Right?
the agent basically had a risk of working for free if the agent or if the buyer never wanted to talk to them again.
Sure.
Or in the grand scheme of things, if you show one or two homes, it's not really killing multiple hours out of your day. But
Sure.
yeah, so you could go see 20 homes without signing an agreement if you wanted to.
Right. But now you have to.
Yes, and there's some pros and cons, but I think the pros are going to outweigh the cons here. We have a really unique opportunity to go through a full consultation with a client now. Mm-hmm. If you didn't before, time to do it now. Real estate agents talking to you, but if you're the consumer, this is a good thing for you. This allows the agent to sit down with you and tell you about their services and who they are. But there's also an important step of this is that compensation has always been negotiable. But with the new settlement change, we have to set our compensation in stone during that agreement.
Right.
So if my fee is 2.5%, that's my fee. And if the seller doesn't accommodate that representation agreement states that the buyer will be responsible for the compensation.
Right.
Now, in Texas, I don't know about other states, but in Texas, this has always been the case. In our current representation agreement, it always said, hey, if we get 2 from the seller and we wrote on this agreement 3, you're going to pay us a difference. Now, I've never enacted that, but...
True. Yeah, it's on page 2 of the contract, right?
Yeah.
And we always put 3.
Yeah.
But I've never asked for the difference.
Right, and
it just...
The big change about this is that it's going to be set in stone, that compensation level. Now this can be amended. The forms can be amended. There's things like builder compensation, bonuses, things like that will allow that conversation to change and amendments to be had, which was a big deal. That was something that we were worried about. So if you watch the last video, we had some questions up in the air, one of them being VA, one of them being, what do we do about builder business and things like that when they're doing additional compensation. So, the form can be amended, and we have some new forms. We've actually started using them. The change doesn't take effect till August 17th, but we've started using it now. We're prepared. We've been talking about it, having conversations with our clients. I don't know about you, but I don't really expect sellers to really change the way we've done business. Like, they're still going to offer compensation to an agent.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I think so. I think part of this conversation is that we're educating the buyers and the sellers, right? So it's a conversation that we're having with them and saying, look, it's always been negotiable. You could always do a different percentage.
Sure.
Here's the pros for doing it. Here's the cons, right? So on the one hand, yes, if you don't want to pay the buyer's agent at all, right? You're doing that because you want to save money. I understand. Everybody wants to save money, right? But there's going to be some repercussions. Right.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that reflected in price, and that's been the conversations we've had with sellers. They've asked us. They said, "Well, hey, talk to me about the NAR settlement. What does that look like for me? With if I list it at this price but don't offer compensation, I'm just going to get lower offers anyway, right?" And the reality is yes, because the buyer, or they're going to ask for a credit because the buyer is going to have to compensate their agent now.
Right, which is a big chunk, right? Because before you had that wrapped into your loan.
Right.
Your commission was wrapped. So you're buying a $300,000 home. That's $9,000 on top of all your other fees, closing costs, your down payment. Having that upfront, out-of-pocket commission is a non-starter, for a lot of people,
especially for first-time home buyers. And that was something that we were worried about previously, was how does this affect first-time home buyers? But the general consensus among home sellers is that it's business as usual. Now, do I expect percentages to go down? Like, do I, if you look at numbers, the average commission is like 2.5%. That's when someone tells you that, that's across the board, right? Different states, different numbers. Some people charge more, some people charge less.
But 2.5% on both sides versus.
Well, I'm just saying the average commission in general is 2.5%. So, do I expect that to go down a little bit towards buyers agents? Probably. I think that will definitely, we'll probably see 2.25 to 2.5 be the average.
Right.
Just because there are going to be sellers that want to start saving money, especially when it comes to interest rates being high and having to kind of get every dollar out of their equity as possible when they have to move and things like that. I definitely see that happening, and I'm not saying that it's bad or it's good. It means as agents we have to show our value and work a little bit harder. And if you're someone who's watching this and you are not a real estate agent, it's definitely important that you know that a good agent is going to provide a ton of value for you, and they will earn every dollar that they work for.
Which is huge, right? Because I think I think part of the whole lawsuit was, why am I paying this quote unquote recommended rate when my agent doesn't do anything?
Right. Or during COVID, the houses sold themselves.
Right. And so and the thing is that's a valid question, right? And so it comes down to is that we're gonna have to show why we're worth it, right? And there's gonna be a reason why, if someone's charging you 1%,
right, there's
gonna be, it's gonna be reflected in that.
Yeah, and
theoretically,
we've had this conversation that cheap isn't always good in this matter. But I think when it comes to this, and if you're a consumer watching this, I really want you to understand something, that this is going to be a normal conversation that gets had. This is something that every consultation that we're having is, this is what our compensation looks like, and we're gonna go and try and get it from the sellers. And there's 20 different ways to skin a cat on this. There's different ways to go get compensation from the seller. Closing cost incentives is the biggest one, and the removal of compensation off the MLS is huge, because we actually have to have conversations with the listing agent and create that rapport and relationship. So I think that you're really going to see agents that are high quality agents. They're going to work really hard, and they're going to communicate effectively with the client. Hey, this is what their compensation is. And there's even a spot in the agreement that you can write, if the client doesn't want to see a house that doesn't have compensation, we don't have to show it to them.
Right.
And I think that's healthy for that relationship, because that doesn't create bad blood between the buyer and the agent. What it does is creates transparency and intentional relationship between the two.
And I think that's the big part of it, right? Is the transparency. Because it's one thing if say you were not being ethical about it. You're like, I'm not going to show these 6 homes because they're not going to pay me.
That's why we got sued in the first place.
Right? That, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to show you these 6 homes. Well, the thing is, if you're having that conversation with the buyer at the beginning, hey, here, we've had this conversation about we've had this conversation about the compensation. Just so you know, these 6 homes are not good. They have already stated they're not going to pay me. I can show it to you, but we're going to refer back to what our agreement says.
Right.
Right? And so that's up to you. You want to see that point? You don't want to see that point? Then that's kind of as long as everyone is talking with each other, I feel like that's going to be the important part.
Yeah, it really comes down to the consultation. The next big thing that I wanted to highlight here since our last video was builder compensation. So if you work with a builder and your real estate agent is representing you, sometimes there are bonuses that are given to the agent, and they can range, in $1,000, couple thousand, an extra 2-3%. It just depends on how long the house has been sitting there and different factors and promotions. And so the biggest change, at least in Texas, and I'm sure it's like this in other parts of the country, but in Texas, and specifically if you're watching this in Texas, there's an amendment to the buyer's representation agreement that now says, hey, we're receiving additional compensation from the seller or the builder. Now, a lot of the time, sellers aren't going to provide a bonus to an agent for selling their home. You see it sometimes, but everything comes down to price. It's never like, oh, the agent is going to make more, so I want to buy that house. It's always price.
Right.
This specific scenario, we disclose it, and then we amend the listing or the buyer's representation agreement to show that. That way, the buyer is not responsible for that additional compensation, because the agreement, the way it states with the changes, is that Tony, if you're going to buy a house with me, my fee is 2.5% to 3%. Whatever we say, 2.5%. I'll just use that as a basis point. My fee is 2.5% of the purchase price, and then the builder goes, well, actually, I'm paying you 3% plus a 1% bonus.
Right.
Well, then we would sign an amendment that says, hey, we're actually getting paid differently. You're not responsible for any of this. We're good. And that helps.
So the agreement is not saying at least 2%. So in this case, if we signed an agreement for 2.5%, that's not saying 2.5% minimum. That's what it is. So that's why you have to have the amendment.
Fee is for our service.
That's why you have to have that amendment, because you're actually getting potentially more.
Yeah, and so the agreement as it stands now, once that number is in there, it's in there. Now you can always amend it, like I said, but if I say you're going to pay me 2.5% in case the seller doesn't, that's what we get paid at closing. And that's a hard stop. And so what you do is you see the change from, you kind of look at it and you're like, hey, it was, well, we're going to get paid if the difference. Well, now we're getting paid this.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
Got it.
So if the seller's paying 2 and our agreement's 2.5 or 3, then the buyer's still going to be paying the difference. I think before the big change was we're not going to really charge that, but now contractually, that's what we're getting paid.
Unless you amended it.
Yeah, and I think that's a question to have with your, it's a case by case scenario. I think so. There's buyers out there that are not going to be able to scrounge together an extra $3,000.
Right, which is understandable. Yeah.
And it's my personal opinion, but I'm not going to impress upon my buyers extra fees that make their life a living hell, because no one wants to be house poor or broke going into a house.
Yeah.
Right. So the change there, I think, is going to be really interesting with builders. We have a solution now, so that way there's not this awkward, well, I was supposed to get paid this, but I didn't because you signed this agreement, and so there's going to be an amendment that can change things and change the parameters as needed, case by case scenario. And we do a lot of builder business. So I had one the other day where we got a bonus from the builder, and we're using the new forms, and I disclosed, hey, we're getting a bonus from the builder of $2,000, and just wanted to let you know, we have a commission agreement signed with the builder, so you're not responsible for anything. That's great. That's awesome, because it takes the pressure off the buyers. Buyers can continue focusing on what they want to focus on.
Yeah.
So that was change number 2 since the last time we talked about this. The biggest thing that I think, and we don't have an official declaration of it yet, but there has been a temporary solution to this, which is the VA. A lot of our clients are VA. Whether they're retired military or they're PCSing, that was something that I was really worried about in our last video. I was like, hey, what happens to, VA buyers, because they can't finance the commission. FHA and conventional can.
Right.
VA can't. They have a hard ban on it. So in May, the VA came out, after there was some lobbying. The people were like, hey, like, what's going on here? We need to know this, from the consumer side and the real estate side. Like, hey, what are we going to do about this? And they said, hey, we're going to put a temporary suspension on the ban for financing commissions, because before the VA would not allow you to finance commissions. There's a temporary suspension on that until they get more of an official ruling out and actually change the structure. Because these things, this has to go through a lot of bureaucracy to get it done.
There could be a lot of layers to get it done.
It's also a weird point in the year because we're in an election year. So a lot of things that probably need to get done there aren't probably going to get done until after November.
Yeah.
So there's a stop, a temporary suspension, which means if you are a veteran and you are buying a home that doesn't have commission to the agent, then you can actually finance the commission. Something, and this is just some commentary from my experience, is that I am a little concerned because the funding fee by the VA is already financed in. So you're, depending on the price of the home, you're already financing more than the home's value.
Right.
And then you're financing commission. So in reality, your loan...
You're underwater already.
Yes.
Technically.
And so, I do hope that there's maybe something in that they can make better. Because what I don't want to have happen is people get foreclosed on 2 years later, just for me to make $6,000. Right? That I'm not about that.
Right.
So and this all comes back to the people are always like, oh, it's a good time to buy a house. Like, if you can afford it, it's a good time to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, I don't think we're going to have I don't want people to become house poor just to pay commission.
100%.
So those are the big changes. If you have watched this all the way through, we appreciate you watching this.
Thanks for watching.
These take effect August 17th. We've already been practicing them in our business. So if you want to know more about what this looks like and what this looks like in your home buying journey, you can actually contact us and reach out. We'll have a conversation with you about this. It is, kind of different state by state what your agreements look like. So please, reach out to us and we'll get you connected with a local realtor in your area that can help you with that. But reach out to us below if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.